join me in welcoming Dr. Dan Roper.
Thank you for that very kind introduction, and with the power of technology, I can enjoy it whenever I want.
I know.
And it's a great privilege and pleasure to be here this afternoon, really, to talk about general practice and the CAB. Where does one finish and the other one start? And as our chairman let the cat out of the bag, really, I was sort of brought up by the Citizens Advice Bureau because my mother worked for it for many years when it was in the old YPI on George Street. And whether she should or should not have done, she used to regale us with many an entertaining story at the end of the week about the things that had happened at what we very kindly called the CAB at that time. And so it's a great pleasure for me to sort of come back and repay some of that, because I think not only do those of us who are involved in advice give a lot of helpful, obviously, support to the people that we see, it also gives us a fantastic sense of achievement, self-satisfaction, and also it really does give us a lot of, improves our self-esteem and makes us feel really important. I know for somebody that hadn't been to work for about 30 years when she started there, it gave her a huge amount of pleasure. Well, general practice and the advice sector. Well, how qualified is a general practitioner to talk about giving advice to people? Well, quite a lot really. I mean, in our practice we've got about 15,800 patients, and I've been a GP in my practice for 27 years. And I've probably done about 150,000 consultations over that period of time. And every year in our surgery, we probably do about 60,000 consultations with patients who just see the GP. So as I'll talk about as we go through, that's huge, ample opportunity for us to give advice to people about all sorts of variety of issues. So I think it's a really sort of symbiotic relationship, and we've been very proud to host the CAB in our practice for several years now, and it's been an extremely positive partnership. Now I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about this survey that came in that I was very kindly made aware of. A very general practice, how much time do GPs spend on issues other than other than health? And this is from February 2015, involving about 1,000 GPs, and I'm sure some of you have already seen it. GPs in England report spending almost a fifth of their time on social issues that are not principally about health. Now, it's hard really to say whether that's an accurate depiction of the real situation, because general practitioners have a great tendency to over-exaggerate the amount of time that they spend on things that they don't perceive to be that effective. And it will vary from one area to the other. In a city like Hull, I would imagine that the percentage is way in excess of 19%. In other areas, that advice might just be, what do you think I should provide at the village phase, or would you like to come and open it? But it's certainly not like that in Hull. And the implied cost to the health service, I'm always a bit suspicious about these implied costs to the health service, as though it's some sort of waste of money, which it certainly isn't, is about £400 million a year. But the other thing that will colour this is that GPs will remember the difficult cases, the cases that go on for a long time, those that are difficult to solve. And the other thing as well is that they may not immediately come up in a consultation. So non-health demand has a knock-on effect for patient care, because 80% of GPs report that dealing with non-health issues mean that they have less time for other patients' health needs. But conversely, 49% of those GPs say that time spent on those things helps them to understand their local communities and improves relationships. And I think that's one of the things that I feel very strongly about, is this idea that GPs, going back a generation or two ago, seem to be much more important integrated figures within local society than they are now, and for all sorts of reasons, which would be to do with the way that general practice is organised. We've become, in my view, and I don't think it's necessarily a good development, a little bit more divorced from the people that we're actually serving. And I think that's a real shame, because I think GPs should advocate not just on behalf of their patients' health problems, but also their psychological issues, but also social issues as well. Now, the situation could be improved, because GPs would love to have more time, certainly the skills that they require, and also have knowledge about the advice sector to be able to help patients a little bit more effectively. So what would be the top three issues raised with GPs that require specialist knowledge? Well, you wouldn't be surprised to hear the three most important ones are personal relationship problems, problems with housing, and problems with work and unemployment. Now, the thing is that these patients don't come to see us and say straight off the bat, Dan, I've got a major problem with my housing, I've got a major problem with my employment, or with debt or financial problems. As we talked about earlier, I've been involved in general practice education for many years, and one of the messages that I try to get across to young doctors is that being ill is one of the well, it's not the only reason why people come to see their general practitioner. It is one of the reasons that they come. They may be ill, but all patients that come and see a general practitioner have got a problem, and it's up to you to find out what that problem is. So I might be doing a consultation with a patient, and I've got a couple of students with me, and I say, so what do you think is the problem that this patient is presented with? And they might say, well, their arthritis has got worse, or their diabetes has got worse, or they're in a bit more pain, or they're anemic, or that type of thing. And I would say, no, the actual reason that they've come is that they've just received a letter to say that their housing benefit has been cut, or their other employment benefits have been cut, or they're running out of money and that type of thing. And patients will not want to admit this to their GP when it is the presenting problem. So I say to my young doctors and students, you will have to find a way of asking patients whether in their lives they are suffering from these problems, because it is only then that the patient will open up and tell you what's really going on. And it's amazing how often that is the case, really, and then the penny drops. So it's a message that we have to keep giving all the time, that being ill is only one of the reasons why patients come to see us. So when patients raise these non-health issues, only a third of GPs said that they felt as though they advised patients adequately. And again, that's about knowledge, that's about skills, it's about availability of services. So we really want to help the patients, but it's knowing where to get help and how to sort of access it. So most GPs could not respond to non-health issues in an integrated way. And so what they ended up doing was signposting their clients coming to see them to external agencies, with no real guarantee that they might be going to the right place. So what we've done in our practice is to address that, is to become involved in a couple of schemes. One is obviously having the Citizens Advice Bureau embedded within the practice, like in 18 other practices in the city. But also as well to develop one of our members of staff who's been in the practice for nigh on 30 years now, to be the font of all knowledge when it comes to social issues, to do with benefits, to do with all sorts of these other issues that affect patients' lives. So we've made a conscious effort to skill one member of our staff up who acts as a point of contact for patients. So I will say, I don't know what help you might need, but I'll give you Carol's telephone number, you give her a ring, and she'll tell you what needs to be done. So she can put people in touch with the CAB, she can put people in touch with social prescribing, and we also were part of a pilot where we had an embedded social worker in the practice. That went on for a year. It was part of a training initiative with the local university. And it's one of the most valuable things that I've done in 30 years of general practice, actually, was to get a social worker to come into the practice. And one of our strategies for us as a CCG would be to try and integrate that into all practices in the city, where you have somebody who's attached to your practice, who clients can see without having to go through us. So they walk into the building and say, I'd like to make an appointment with your social worker or with your advice worker, because you will know that you have to sort of sometimes tease it out of people, we do in our setting, and encourage them and make them feel as though it's all right to bring these issues up and they're not bothering people. Because, as we've heard, I'm sure you heard this morning, people are embarrassed to talk about these things. They certainly can sometimes feel as though they need permission to talk to us about it and the people that work with us. So what's happening? Well, you won't be surprised to know that it's increasing. And 3/4 of GPs said that non-health demand had arisen in the last year, and that's absolutely the case. That's been really very much an austerity thing. And it's not just sort of social issues to do with, as we say, housing and personal relationships and employment, whatever. It's depression, it's anxiety. And I would now very specifically ask my patients, if they present with anxiety and depression, are you experiencing financial problems? A very direct question that 2 or 3 years ago I may not have asked for one or two reasons. A, because it might not have been likely, or I might not have felt comfortable about doing it, or C, felt as I had the resources to actually deal with it. Because when you raise issues with patients about things, there's no point raising it if you've got nowhere to direct those patients to. So certainly having advice services embedded within the practice makes it easy to have that sort of conversation. So if we do move on quickly to just to talk about cost, at the time GPs spend on non-health issues does come at a cost. And we estimate that the basic financial cost of the health service of non-health demand on GPs is at least £395 million. Now, the point about that is that that is money that could be spent much more effectively, both within general practice, but also within the organisations that you work for. There's nothing worse than resources being directed in the wrong place. That is an absolute waste of resources. It actually represents 5% of NHS England budget for general practice. And it is the equivalent to the salaries of 3,750 full-time GPs. And if we're in a situation where there is a massive shortage of general practitioners, but we can all relax because apparently, according to the Secretary of State, there are 5,000 general practitioners just waiting to be unleashed from a warehouse on the M1. And I was thinking, you could sort of, if you go on, I've been on Amazon, I've put in, general practice, and it's, if you sign up to Amazon Prime, you get one delivered free within 24 hours. But I'm still waiting for that to. I don't know what stage we're in by the time I got the packaging off, but I'm not particularly good with that. But it's just there is a problem. So there are 32,000 general practitioners in the country, and they do 340 million consultations per year. It's a huge amount, isn't it, really? It's sort of mind-boggling, really. I think it's based on the fact that for a population, say, of 60 million people, the idea is that patients attend their general practitioners on average 5 times a year. Now, I have patients that come maybe once every 5 years, but I have some patients that come 80 times a year. Now, they don't have 80 separate medical problems in a year. What we're dealing with is an unmet social and psychological need, often. And that is extremely difficult to deal with. And the number of consultations has increased, but the number of GPs has decreased in the last sort of 5 years. So we're actually heading sort of in the wrong direction. 90% of patient contact in the NHS goes through primary care, yet we get less than 10% of the funding. It's actually fallen from 2012 to 2013 to now. It's gone from about 11.5% to about 8%. So 90% of the care is provided, healthcare is provided, with 8% of the budget. And so, when people often say when GPs complain about the pressures that they're under, well, you would do, wouldn't you? You've always been complaining. The BMA is always complaining. That's some of the sort of reality, is that we are under, not the same financial pressures that you're under in terms of local authority and the voluntary sector, but they are significant pressures. This pledge runs alongside plans from the NHS to find £22 billion in efficiency savings. And we had a letter this week from the Chancellor of the Exchequer asking us how we were going to contribute to that. And we were thinking about it. We've been down the back of the CCG sofa, and that didn't yield much. And we're having all sorts of events, maybe to try and raise money. Together, hoping to close a £30 billion funding gap by 2020. So moving on to more positive things. CAB GP outreach. It's been going since 2013. 18 sites across the city. And as you've heard before, you won't be surprised to find out that satisfaction is consistently high, greater than 95%. 80% reported improvement in their physical and mental well-being following CAB advice. And 90% of their advice clients reported improvements in their mental state or overall well-being. About 6 months ago, I met a friend of mine who actually is now on the board of a major UK bank, and we were talking about debt. And I got quite heated about it actually, because I was informed that debt is some sort of psychological state that you can will yourself out of. It's a sort of state of mind thing. And I thought, what? It can be a state of, the effect it can have on your mind can certainly put you in a right state, but, the problems that people are facing at the moment are not to do with the way that they're thinking about things. I mean, it's just preposterous to even say it. So people do feel better after they've seen people in the advice section of the GP, but they feel a hell of a lot better when their debt problems are sorted out. So additional clinics have been requested, and we jointly commission it with the City Council. And for an outlay, I think between the CCG and the Council, I think it costs us about £206,000 a year to commission a service. And on a return of that, it's an absolutely fantastic investment. So, just a little bit of work that Councillor Rosebery Pantelakis gave me these details, and I thank her for it. It was an analysis of clients using the GP CAB service versus the Wilson Centre. So those coming to general practice are more likely to have a long-term health problem, which is not surprising, tend to be an older age group, predominantly female, and interestingly, have a higher income profile. So they still, on a higher income, can still get some of these problems that we've been talking about and tend more to be homeowners. And so what it means is that I think there's an opportunistic thing here where patients might come into the surgery, find out that there is an advice service, and then avail themselves of it because it's available to them. And I think that's I think that's one of the powerful ways that the CAB in surgeries has been very effective. So what are the challenges? Well, rather than not tell, I've discussed a little bit about that in that it's some areas that general practitioners don't feel qualified to go into, they don't think it's their role to go into it, they don't feel comfortable about it, and they don't necessarily want to bring up issues that they don't feel as though they've got the tools to deal with, whether it's their own personal skill set or support around them. So things continue to be unsaid and untalked about when just an easy opening question often does sort of pay dividends. It is everybody's problem, as I've said before. I think that we see the effects of it in our surgery, and I think as GPs and as commissioners, we do have an opportunity to get more involved in this, in some of the work that we're already doing. We need to look at access to services, and the other thing as well is that if we provide, GPs will sort of ask the question, well, if you provide all these things anyway, will patients still come to see us about it? Because there is this element that there are some patients that we see that want their problems sorting out. There are some patients that we see that want to talk about their problems, and it's actually talking about the problems as they continue that they get benefit from. And it can be frustrating, as I'm sure you find in the work that you do, offering solutions all the time that for some reason clients don't feel empowered to sort of take forward with them. Single point of access, advertising and utilising, obviously a great worry for everybody, as we've talked about before, is cuts to local authority budgets. So finally, in conclusion, one thing that's come to my mind is that you can't put all this on the internet, you can't put it all online, because information is different to advice. Advice seems to be much better to be given face to. People like to eyeball somebody. You want to see somebody face to face. There's no substitute for it, because it's only that way that you can see that the person's understood it, taken it on board, is prepared to do something about it, or is a little bit sort of reluctant. So I see patients come to see me and they say, I googled it. I googled it on the internet, or I interneted it on Google, or whatever it was. I looked it up on Google, and I still came to see you because I want your advice on it. So it's still the interpretation of advice. People have said they want to talk about their problems even when there's no solution. Patients access services within practices opportunistically, so there is still a great unmet need in primary care for this sort of thing. That need is going to increase, and CAB GP services working together appear to be well regarded and extremely good value for money. And again, some figures that I was given by one of your colleagues talked about the financial gains obtained by the joint GP CAB service over the first quarter of this year from April to June. And advisors working in primary care have achieved financial gains of £627,000 for patients seen just within general practice. That's unclaimed benefits, entitlements that are not receiving, or challenging decisions made through a process called mandatory reconsideration. And the figure that struck me was that the specialist benefit teams in Hull and East Riding win 80% of appeals, which demonstrate the poor quality of initial decisions. That's something I didn't know, and that sort of figure amazed me. So I'd just like to thank everybody in the voluntary advice sector, the CAB for organising it, and hopefully we can continue to have a very fruitful relationship. Thank you.